Okay, good afternoon, students. How was your week? Yes, so this week we'll be continuing our lecture on CSE 201 titled Computer Programming 1. You remember that this is a compulsory course for you, meaning that without this course you cannot without passing this course you cannot graduate. So it's very important that we pay attention to this. My own name is Professor Benjamin Aribisala, your lecturer for this course, and as you know, the Vice Chancellor for Oduduwa University. The focus of this class is on conditional statement. But before we go to the focus, I just want to remind you of what we learned last week, and then after that we go to the learning objectives for this particular class of today. Last week, you remember, we looked at data types, and we also looked at Boolean operators, relational operators, all with implementation in Python programming. In the class before the last, I've introduced Python programming to you and the IDLE that we will use for implementing Python, our Python codes. So today we have 5 learning objectives. These are the things you will achieve by attending this class. I always tell you that it's important you attend my class. Just reading my note is not enough. So by attending this class today, you will be able to describe what we mean by conditional statements. That is, at the end of this class, you will be able to describe conditional statements. That's learning objective 1. The second learning objective is you will be able to describe if statement. If statement. What do we mean by if statement? So at the end of today's class, you'll be able to describe if statement in the context of Python programming. Number 3 is you will be able to explain the 5 types of if statements. So you will understand the 5 types of if statements and you'll be able to explain them. The 4th learning objective is you'll be able to understand and explain the syntax for each of these 5 if statements. I say that again. At the end of this class, the 4th objective is that you will be able to understand and explain the syntax for each of these 5 if statements. And lastly, if you listened carefully, you pay attention to what I'm going to teach you today, at the end of this class, you can beat your chest and say that you understand how to use these 5 if statements, the different types of if statements. That is what we are going to learn today, these 5 objectives. So I'm going to start from the first one. And as we go through, as I always say to you, try to tick the learning objectives and see which of them you have achieved today. So I will be starting by describing to us what we mean by conditional statements. Now, just assume, I always say to you that computer science is the best course in the entire world. It's very easy to study, and it's got practical application. So in computer science, we are interested in programming, and there are so many programming languages. As I said in the first class, today is Python programming. So I was going to talk to you about conditional statements. So I'm still on that slide 1, So what is a conditional statement? Now, so conditional statements are statements that perform different actions based on whether a specific statement evaluates to true or false. Whether a specific statement evaluates to true or false. I give you an example. We're still on this. I want you to understand this slide before we go to the next one. So now I said, you know, we're talking about conditional statement. Just take for example, it rains today. You know, before coming for the class, if it was raining, what happens? Now there are different things that can happen. So the first thing is if it rains. So it doesn't need to rain every day. So if it rains in the morning, you have the chance to stay in the hostel, but you may want to come for the class. If you think that you are going to learn something in the class, that is a way I like to describe whether you come to the class or not. In my own context, I don't say if the class is compulsory. I say, let's assume that in today's class, I'm going to give 10,000 naira to every student that comes. Let's assume it is raining, and you know there is 10,000 waiting for you. What will happen? Yes, everybody will come because you know there is money. That's how much human loves money. But back to conditional statement. You know, we want to know there is a condition. So in the example I just gave, if it rains and you want to come to class, you need the umbrella. So the condition there is if it rains. So if it rains and you have to come to class, so you need the umbrella. If it doesn't rain, you don't need the umbrella. So in Python, there are two forms of implementing, or two different ways of implementing if statement. You know, or two different ways of implementing conditional statement. One is if, the other one is case switch, but our focus is on if statement. So still on conditional statement. Conditional statements are known or can be described as decision-making statements. Decision-making statements. Everybody takes decision at one point or the other. So we need to use this conditional statement to execute specific block of code if a given condition is true or false. So if a given condition is true or false, so you want to take a decision if the condition is true or false. So what you can see on the screen is the flowchart of conditional statement. This flowchart, as a typical flowchart, has, you know, the start, and it's got the end, and it's got the process, you know, symbols. But there is something specific about it, or unique about this particular flowchart, and that's what makes it a conditional statement flowchart. That's the condition, that symbol that looks like a kite. So that symbol is the decision symbol. So still on this particular flowchart, when you test if this condition is true or false, you look at it. If the condition is true, then you go and perform or execute the code in if block. But if the condition is not true, then you perform the other or you execute the else block in this. We're still going to look at the different types of conditional of if statement, but this just tells us how a conditional statement looks like in flowchart representation. Now there are 5 different types of if statements in Python. There are 5 different types of if statements in Python. The first one is, you can just call that ordinary if statement, but we call it if statement. So that's number 1. Number 2, if else statement. Number 3, else if. Mind you, I said else if. I didn't say else if. Else if is used in other programming languages like Python or Java. But in Python, we call it else if. E-L-I-F. Else if statement. Number 4 is nested if else statement. And lastly, else if ladder. So what I'm going to do now is to run you through each of these if statements. For today, I'm going to cover only 3. So the first one, the second, and the third, and then we can finish the class. Okay, you remember in the first class, or in the last class, I told you that there is what we call syntax. Syntax is just like a rule for using a particular, command in a programming language. So how do you write it? So just like in English language, when you write names, they must start with capital A. So we have the syntax. So in this particular case, the syntax for if statement is, as you can see, the first line, if condition full colon. That full colon is very important. And the next line is block. So that block, you remember in the last class I told you, we have blocks in Python, and block means set of instructions that can be grouped, as a chunk. Now, in this case, the syntax is if condition full colon block. So the condition is a Boolean expression. Boolean expressions are expressions that executes or that gives output 0 or 1. And so that condition, is a Boolean expression, so that resolves to false or true, or what we call 0 or 1. And then the block is a series of Python statements that I just mentioned. So if the condition evaluates to true, the block is executed. So this is the flowchart. If the condition evaluates to true, the block is executed. Otherwise, nothing happens. In this flowchart, for every if statement that I explain, I will give you the flowchart so that you can have a perfect understanding. So the flowchart for if statement, we are right hand side, of the decision, and you can see the bottom part of it, the false. So if the condition is true, then the statement, the block is executed, all the statements that follow, and then otherwise the rest of the code is executed. So let's quickly look at an example. For example, I have 2 examples here. The first one is assuming that the pass mark, in a test we just did. Oh, by the way, there will be a test in 2 weeks' time, so I need to remind you that, as I told you previously. So if the pass mark is 50%, and I need you to write a Python code to determine if somebody has passed. So let's assume that the variable name for that mark is called score. So we say if score is greater than or equal to 50, then print pass. So that means the student has passed. So simple. If condition, then block. So the condition here is score greater than or equal to 50. And what we are printing, the pass, is the block. So that's example, the first example. The second example is about, if you want to determine or to check an individual, and you said that in this case, the condition is that if you own 5 higher institutions, then we know that you are a particular important individual. So this example is just to help us to tackle that. So it says the variable name is own 5 higher institutions. Own 5 higher institutions. So if own 5 higher institution is equal to 5, then you are to print your name is Dr. Rahman Adedoyin, the proprietor of Oduduwa University. Now I want you to pay attention to this particular example too. There's something tricky about it. You might be thinking, I was talking about block. So line 1 of this code is the one that starts with if. Line 2 starts with print, it prints the name. Line 3 prints the proprietor of Oduduwa University. Line 4 prints congratulations. So will this line, which of this line, or where does the block end, or where does the block start? Python is a very, very lovely programming language. It marks blocks by using indentation. So the block is where the indents or the indentation is. So the two print statements will be executed if own 5 higher institution is equal to 5. So own 5 higher institution, if that is equal to 5, the first print statement is executed, the second one is executed, and of course the third will be executed. But what of if own 5 higher institution is not equal to 5? Let's say there is somebody who owns 1 higher institution. So if own 5 higher institution equals 5 will be a false. In such a situation, the fourth print statement, number 1 print statement, is not executed. The second print statement is not executed, but the last one is executed. So, we have been talking about if statements. I've given you 2 examples after looking at the syntax and the flowchart. Now, as I promised at the beginning of this lecture, I told you we have 5 learning objectives. So I'm going to remind us the 5 learning objectives. I said at the end of the class, you'll be able to describe conditional statement, you'll be able to describe if statement, you'll be able to understand and explain the 5 types of if statement, and you'll be able to understand and explain the syntax for each of these 5 if statements, and then you'll be able to understand how to use each of these 5 if statements. Now we come to the end of the class, and I want to give you an assignment. The assignment is a very simple one. You know, we have learned today, you know, the if statement, if else statement, and else statement. So this assignment requires you to write a Python program. You will write a Python program that will determine the grade of a student in a course. So like this course, CSE 201. So let's assume we have done our exam now, and I want to determine the grade. You know, so what is the grade? So the grade A, B, C, D, E, F. So what determines whether you have A, whether you have B, or whether you have a C? So you will write a Python program that will determine if an individual has any of this grade in this particular course, CSE 201. And the deadline for submission is next week. Yes, you can finish next week. So submit by sending to the email address that I provided, you know, previously for submission of assignment, and then I will see you next week. Thank you.